Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to take this opportunity and thank everybody for joining me on this wonderful adventure on this wonderful Thursday in May. It was such a beautiful day outside. Apparently, it's supposed to get ugly tonight, so I'm glad you're here enjoying your time today. So, got to get through some housekeeping stuff because I haven't done one of these in a while. So, with that, we all get to go through it together. So, my name is David Furman. I'm an attorney here with Altitude Community Law. I'm in the transactional department and have a generally good time doing it. Right now, you see a PowerPoint presentation taking up most of your screen. It's most of it. It's kind of, call most of it. Most of your screen. There should also be a small box on the left, which left-hand side of the screen with the presenter, me. On the right side of the menu, you see a private icon chat. Please use this icon to type your questions throughout the presentation. Questions will be addressed either at the end of the webinar or, as you know, if you've ever done one of these with me, I do love to be interrupted. I'll get to them as soon as I can. Maybe if there's a break in the action or there's a particularly good question popping up, I am more than happy to stop and respond to those questions, because if you have a question, I'm sure somebody else has a question. If you have audio or video issues during the presentation, please click the No Audio or Video button below the presentation on your screen and follow the instructions. So it's kind of a self-help type thing nowadays. One CMCA credit will be automatically generated and emailed to you after the webinar, assuming you attend the entire program. Sorry, everybody, you're stuck with me for 59 more minutes. These credits are not transferable, meaning whoever registered, they get the credit. Please email Jessa Ledesma at JLEDASMA, that's JLEDESMA at altitude.law, or call 303-991-2086 if you happen to have any questions about the webinar or receiving your CMCA certificate. Lastly, there will be a survey that will pop up at the end of the window at the end of the webinar. Please let us know what you think of the webinar. Your thoughts and opinions are important to all of us, and most notably, if they're ever going to let me back in front of this screen again. So it's really important to say whether you liked the webinar or not, mostly so I can do this again. So with all that being said, here we go. Planning for disaster, are you ready? Or more importantly, is your community ready? There are many phases of disaster, starting with December 30th, 2021. The Marshall Fire burned 6,026 acres. 1,000 homes were destroyed and over $513 million worth of damages. If you recall, it says December 30th right there. This was in the middle of winter. So there is no off season for fires anymore. June 24th, 2021, the Champlain Towers South Building collapsed. 98 dead, estimated $1 billion in property, and it caused the destruction that they had to implode the other towers so they could redevelop the site. On June 1, 2018, the 416 fire whipped through southwest Colorado, burning 57,000 acres. 13,000 homes and businesses were evacuated, including communities in the Purgatory ski area. I've added a few more to that slide since I've done a little bit of research. If you recall, less than a year ago, Maui, Lahaina, in 24 hours, less than 24 hours, it was closer to 14 and a half hours, Lahaina burned. There were 500 plus deaths, or 101 plus deaths, and astronomical property damage. The entire town was wiped out. With that, I think kind of going through these things, there's one other fine disaster that I missed and I forgot to put on this, and I'm pretty sure every single one of you can guess what it is. A pandemic. We all lived through one. It took a tremendous toll on employment, the economy, how associations conducted their business. There was legislation leading right into how associations operated due to the COVID pandemic. And if you look at the state of Colorado's disaster preparedness plan, and they actually have one, they list drought, heat, flood, and wildfires. Sorry, got to get that word out. As the high to very high risks, along with the pandemic, of occurring again. And we're going to have to deal with those that's what the state is planning for. The state also considers dam collapse to be a moderate risk, which I find kind of interesting because if you look at their statistics on dams, there are 471 dams classified in the state of Colorado as high hazard dams. Now, what the high hazard dam means, it's up to the state of Colorado, but these are local dams like Stanley Lake. That is considered to be a high hazard dam for failure, for flooding, for other events. If you manage communities near Stanley Lake, that's a high hazard dam. The Garden of the Gods Dam in Colorado Springs, right next to a large number of associations, is considered a high hazard dam. So we kind of see the risks that are out there, and they're only getting worse. And that's part of, I think, what's going on and what this class will address is 20 of the largest fires in the, oh wait, time out, let me do this. There we go. 20 of the largest 20 fires in the state of Colorado. So 20 biggest, 16 of them have been in the last 13 years. 15 have been in the last 9 years. 11 of these in just the last 5 years, 9 in the last 3, and 4 of the top 5 have been in just the last 3 years, as far as property damage, as far as acreage burned, as far as what's happening in the nation. So you look at these and you have to ask what's going on. And there's also another fire risk that, again, not necessarily on this, because it's not as prevalent as it could be yet, but EV chargers and EV cars, as these become more and more popular, electric vehicle fires are very, very difficult to put out. And I was talking to some people in Vail that are addressing this, and apparently it's Vail fire departments or the Vail fire marshal's plan that if there is an EV charger or an EV car that catches on fire, their plan is to go hook a chain up to it, drag it out of the parking lot, and just put it in an open area to let it burn, because modern mobile firefighting technology just isn't capable of putting out a large-scale electric vehicle fire. So it's something to consider, that how we address these problems and how we move forward with them. Okay. Other financial disasters. Hailstorms. We all know you have 5% wind and hail deductibles that could result in a deductible payment of anywhere between $250 to $1 million. That would devastate most communities, resulting in repairs not being made, large defaults. FHA, after the Champlain Tower event, the FHA announced rules that halted loans in communities with deferred maintenance. It's not so much anymore that you have to have the funds readily available. You have to have completed the repairs. Structural repairs, electrical repairs, plumbing repairs. If you have an elevator, those elevators have to be repaired and in working order for FHA to agree to close a loan in your community. This could have a devastating impact on sales in the community. This could have a devastating impact on assessments in communities. You've also experienced upwards of 1,000% increases in insurance premiums. I'm not even exaggerating. I've got associations that were going from $600,000 or $60,000 a year premiums to well over $1 million too, because of the location, because of the uses of the building, because of the construction of the building. And you've got these situations, and associations are now scrambling. And I know you all have experienced it on how to find insurance and how to make sure your building is insured and how the owners are insured, while quite frankly not breaking the bank. And if we are hoping that the state of Colorado comes to our rescue, I think that's at least multiple years away, because the bill, the insurance task force bill, as of right now, has not even made it out of committees, and it is just sitting there. And even if it does pass in the last 4 or 5 days of the session, doesn't require a report to be delivered back to the secretary or the legislature until 2026. So at a minimum, we are 2 to 3 years away from any help coming from the state of Colorado. And I think what they need to look at is California's FAIR plan, which is the insurance of last resort for homeowners in California, which is broke, has a multiple year waiting list to get on it, and they are deemed to be in a situation where they cannot pay all the claims that may be brought to it. So they are essentially an insolvent insurance company in the state of California. So again, that model just doesn't work, and we're going to have to figure this out as we continue to try and find how to insure these buildings. Okay, so what disasters may impact your community? Well, as we've kind of discussed, natural disaster, fires, floods, terrorism, hail. Terrorism's not off the table still. And if you manage a downtown community or a community near a institute of higher education, you're starting to see more and more protests occur on campus for a variety of different reasons. They're becoming larger, they're becoming more outspoken. And I think it's not going to take much to make a tipping point that those could become problematic. Another one I wrote down here real quick is I'm pretty sure that every single one of your board members and everybody in your community would say that a mass influx of the unhoused would be a disaster in the community. And how do you address that? So we need to start making plans for these things as to how to put together a plan, and how do you identify those hazards that may impact your community. Then you've got Presidential Policy Directive 8, which was adopted a while back, right after the 9/11 attacks, is an attempt to increase community-wide preparation. It's done through the Office of Homeland Security. And it really is an attempt to get the message out. Now, they haven't marketed it very well, but it's to get out all of the potential issues and how to best plan for some of these disasters that may very well impact your community on a regular basis. Colorado's plan, for instance, Colorado does have their own disaster preparedness plan. I kind of mentioned it at the beginning. It's 927 pages long. And it goes through, as I mentioned, it identifies 471 dams in the state of Colorado that are considered high hazard dams. It goes through and it identifies and prioritizes certain areas. And much so, I'm sure everybody's chagrin on this call, hail is considered a very minor disaster for the state to deal with. It's not even on its radar of what to do with hail claims or hail damage in communities. So your plans for natural disasters. First, getting informed. Participate in an emergency alert system. Create an emergency alert system. I think that you as managers and you as board members in the community, you have first line kind of whole grassroots access to your owners. You know who's in the community. You know your owners and kind of their habits, and getting information for them and being able to quickly and efficiently get information out to your owners is much more effective than I think even like an Amber Alert or the Silver Alerts and all those different alerts that ring on your cell phones. I think the association has that first line access to owners and is able to get hold of them in a very short order. Staying informed during the disaster and after the disaster ends. You've got to give status updates to your owners. When it's okay to come back, when it's not okay to come back, what the duration of a potential disaster. It's imperative to inform your owners about the conditions on the ground. And if you have a lot of absentee owners, making sure that they communicate with their tenants and making sure the owners know what exactly is happening in the community. I think this is of paramount importance to make sure that you can get those owners to stay involved. Evacuations. Evacuations are a lot more common than many people realize. Hundreds of times each year, due to transportation and industrial actions, cause evacuations, forcing thousands of people to leave their homes. Fires and floods, we mentioned those, cause evacuations even more frequently. Almost every year along the Gulf and Atlantic coasts, they evacuate people. You get the notice of every time a hurricane comes in. There are mandatory evacuations and there are recommended evacuations. If you recall, just last year, in Ohio, there was the train derailment, and it leaked hazardous chemicals, and an entire town of 5,000 people had to be evacuated while the authorities came into the town and cleaned up the mess. These are. I would not doubt at some point in the upcoming 2 to 3 years that we get some sort of mandatory evacuation if you live in or if you're managing communities west of 470. That's going to happen just about on an annual basis that you get wildfire evacuations. You can get evacuations, like I said, for just about any other reason. You need to be prepared. And I can get you, again, if you Google Colorado's disaster mitigation plan, you can download that from the state of Colorado. It's the approved plan, and as I mentioned, it's great reading at 927 pages as to what they do. But again, it's something that you as managers can think, and you as management companies can think of trying to address these, put together a quick notification list. And once you get that in place, you can also start notifying owners of, other things. I hate to overuse it, but, pool openings, pool closings in the event of a storm. Hey, everybody, we've got a hailstorm coming in. It's expected. We're just going to close the pool early and leave it at that. So you can communicate with your owners. And I think if you read again, another 500-page work of art from the HOA resource or the HOA information task force, that's one of the things that they kept harkening on is communication amongst all the owners. And it's communication is one thing the association actually does quite well. So I think, again, we need to take that up to the next step. And you can go to FEMA. It has a basic preparedness checklist that you can educate your owners on and what they should and should not have on hand. In the event of natural disasters, what are your evacuation routes? How do you get out? And go through the recommendations, particularly during high seasons of, you really shouldn't come home with an empty tank of gas in your car. I am, one of the worst people in the world that kind of does that. It's always push it off, I'll fill it up later. But if you've got situations where you need to be asked to move quickly, you should always have, at least a steady supply of gas in your car, and not just rely on being able to get it the next day on your way to work. Do you have battery-powered radios? Do you have crate radios? Do you have a plan for your pets? How are you going to take those? Are you going to be able to evacuate them? What are you going to do? Particularly if you manage a community that maybe has wild livestock. And how do you deal with your horses? How do you deal with the other pets in the community? And these Denver and Colorado is still a kind of a Western feel, and there are still a number of communities that have horses, a number of communities that have different types. And getting into that, have you discussed this with your board? Have you discussed this with your owners? You need informed owners make better owners, and it really is something that the owners, I think, should be prepped for. They should know where to look for information, particularly on the websites of the different owners or the different associations. And maybe you have sample plans on the website as one of your documents. A community disaster plan, kind of take it up from the individual disaster plan, but a community disaster plan. Who has it? When was it last reviewed? Was it ever even prepared? Can residents help? Did you place it on the website? And I will tell you, my firm has a disaster preparedness plan, and it involves kind of a checklist of what needs to happen if something ever happens to the building, or we can't come into the office, or if we have computer outages or down in computer issues. It's who's got our insurance policy, who is obligated to call the insurance company and alert them of the issues we have going on, who handles the employees, who calls the employees and addresses those, where are those numbers, where are those documents, where are those lists, and we have hard copies of them all in case our computer is unavailable. And that's something that I think, generally speaking, as we digitize just about everything in the world, because we don't like paper sitting around and we like the ability to just have all the clutter. Unfortunately, if you have a situation and your management company happens to be located in a community that's evacuating and you somehow can't remote in because power lines are down, how do you know where your policies are? How do you know where your phone numbers are? How do you know where your decision tree is? How do you know where your your phone tree is? These are all things that, there still is a place for a small 3-ring binder to have emergency numbers placed that you can grab and go, or keep at a remote location so that you can update people as you go, and update the ability of sending out, again, mass text messages or mass emails to your community and letting them know what's going on. Okay. FEMA recommends it as a community disaster plan. And as I mentioned, the state of Colorado has one, and then that kind of trickles down to counties and it trickles down. And quite frankly, again, you are on the front end of this, and um, you have this ability to have first party access to the owners. It's very personal access too. Another thing that you could do, and I know I'm a slide behind everybody. I promise I'm going to catch up. Has the association offered any sort of first aid classes? Has the association taken the affirmative of part of your homeowner education, maybe offering, bringing the Red Cross or bringing somebody in to give CPR classes, to give kind of emergency first aid classes? Not as an association sponsor, or maybe as an association sponsored event, but definitely not. The association is not providing this education, and make it optional, something that you can absolutely do. Okay. Facilitate claims after the fact. You managers are the custodians of the documents. I kind of mentioned this. You have the insurance policies, communication information for the vendors in the community. You have all the bank account information, resident communications. It helps facilitate search efforts. If there is somebody that, hey, you can't get hold of, or that hasn't been gone, particularly, and again, high-rise communities or communities where everybody, you can kind of help facilitate those search efforts. The disaster plan itself should be documented. You should get it out to all the owners so all the owners know where to look in the event of an evacuation, in the event of a fire that comes whipping through, and it just facilitates communication. You also should be documenting the association's property, much like when you make a will, you can go through, or when you get insurance on your own personal property, you videotape your house, you videotape the contents of your house, so you can sit there and say, look, this is what was sitting in the house, and yes, I in fact did have the Mona Lisa sitting on a wall. So that facilitates helping your association in making a claim. Yes, our pool was just redone. Yes, this was, our roofs were brand new condition. You can have drone footage. Yes, this was done and this was done. And you can document what was on the property so that you can see exactly what's going on. And then we do have a question of how to legally deal with violent squatters, homeless who can occupy an unoccupied home. All right, we'll get to that in just a second. That is one I will hold till the end, John, so we'll get to it, I promise. Okay, so you document the disaster plan itself, documenting association property, the condition of the property, so you don't get hosed. Make sure you have hard copies of your insurance policies, or at least hard copies of where the insurance information is. Because again, we rely so much on everything being digitized. We rely so much on kind of being able to access our contacts on our computers. What if your computer's down? What if your computer is one of those things absolutely absolutely damaged in the evacuation? You don't have access to it because, again, if you're being evacuated, there's a good chance that power is being turned off to the community because they don't want the risk of fire. You've seen kind of the big fires in California that Pacific Electric and Gas is being blamed for, improper functioning power lines. You're getting Excel is being blamed for the Marshall fires. So what's happening now is in the event of these evacuations and fires, they're just shutting the power off. So you're not going to be able to access your computers if your office happens to be where the disaster is occurring. So again, it's not a bad idea to have a plan. Okay, financial disasters. Are they closer than you think? I think they are. I think much like the stats that 50% of the population in the state of Colorado is living paycheck to paycheck. I quite frankly think there are a number of associations, through no fault of their own, are living assessment to assessment. They can barely pay their bills. They really don't have enough to reserve in the future. That's why Governor Polis vetoed the reserve study bill a couple years back, as it would have been a tremendous financial hardship to actually force associations to reserve close to 100% what the reserve study says, because they just don't have the financial wherewithal to do it right now. Okay, here we go. So background, and again, this is just you know these facts. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But in 1980, the census says there were 2.25 million individual condominium units in the nation. That was in 1980. These units are now over 44 years old now, because this, when I made this slide, it was a couple of years ago. They're 44 years old now. So what does that mean to you? Well, they're considered adults. And as with adults, you know, as we grow old, our bones, they creak a little bit. Our bones, they need a little bit of love. Our bodies need a little bit of love. They're considered to be in their adulthood, meaning owners can expect to replace major building systems and and be doing renovations. So you have a 44-year-old building, an average age of a 44-year-old building. The average life expectancy of plumbing inside of a building is 50 years. Almost every one of these buildings is getting to the point where every pipe in those buildings are going to need to be replaced. And you're going to have to do it in such a manner as to make sure that the community stays operational, but you've got to have funding for it. And when you're talking about every pipe, or quite frankly, your electric systems, you're starting to see this raise its ugly head again, where insurance companies are not going to insure buildings that have aluminum wiring. It's not even that, you have to pigtail it off. If you have aluminum wiring, they're going to make sure they will not insure you, so you're going to have to replace your aluminum wiring. Okay, that's another expense. So that's another major building system. You have electrical panels that have been deemed hazardous. Those all have to be replaced. You're going to have to go in, and insurance companies are, again, kind of forcing this issue of not allowing you to have access to insurance if you have 2, 3 very specific types of fire panel or electrical panels. I'm sorry. Sprinkling the building. If you start making major renovations to your building, the current code requires you install sprinkler systems or fire suppression systems. Again, that's another major expense that you're going to have to take on if you start implementing or start doing some of these things. When buildings get to be 50 plus, expect all major buildings components to have been replaced at least once, and you need to start preparing for the second round. And this is kind of cited by zip match of once you're 50 years old, you need new pipes. You need new chillers and boilers, and you need new electrical. Plus, again, quite frankly, with all of the new technology that owners are expecting to have in their buildings, forget a phone line, forget cable. We want high-speed internet access. We want fiber optics. We want to make sure that I can plug in 180 devices and have high-speed internet because I have, a gaming system and a smart TV. And I've got a computer and a phone. And, I've got 2 kids that have computers and phones. And I've got this, that, and the other. And maybe I have 2 smart TVs. So we need to make sure that we're updating these buildings, quite frankly, just to stay competitive in the market of being able to offer all these new amenities. And if you start looking at, kind of some of these other things when you replace electrical, are you just going to go back, putting in USB chargers as opposed to putting in actual electrical outlets? Because when you buy a new phone, they're not giving you the adapter. They're just giving you a little cord. And it's technology is moving faster than our updates on our buildings. So again, you get these older buildings, they need a little love, and you have to budget accordingly for this. So also with Denver's mandate that you have a green roof, if you're in the city and county of Denver, if you have a high-rise building, you're going to be expected to replace that with a green roof and not just a roof structure that you currently have. Energy benchmarking. You are now being required to benchmark all your energy being consumed in the building, and they're going to start this. Let's not kid ourselves. This is solely for the purpose of putting limits on or targets or thresholds as to reducing energy consumption moving forward. Just something you're going to have to deal with. And this gets to kind of that financial disasters of, are you prepared? Of course, the definition of a crisis is an unstable or crucial time or state of affairs in which a decisive change is pending. We're at a tipping point, and we're at a tipping point on some of these associations that are now 50 plus years old. I think some of this, you'll know that I've told the story that 10 years ago when I went to, or 20 years ago, 20 years ago now, when I was entering into this industry, we were talking about your reserve studies and how the reserve studies by definition are inadequate. Just about every reserve study out there, and it was an attorney's opinion that there should be a line item in your reserve study for complete and total replacement of your building. And complete and total replacement of the building occurs at, pick the day, depending if you are stick and frame built, that may be a lot closer than a concrete post-tension slab high-rise downtown. Their life expectancy is a little longer. I mean, proper maintenance, you get the Empire State Building. But of course, if you look at the Vegas model, it's just cheaper to blow a casino up after 30 years than it is to renovate it. So a financial crisis is a state in which the association's finances reach a condition that the association must take action to change its course. And whether that be large-scale special assessments, whether that be cutting services, amending your declaration to remove certain things out of the association's purview. These are things that you're going to have to start dealing with. These are things that you're going to absolutely have to start addressing as you move forward with your budgets and future budgets. Oh, and again, it's one of those things that if you read the HOA information or the HOA Homeowners Rights Task Force that kind of came off the actual stated goals and stated in one of its side reports that reserve studies and financial health of associations is of paramount concern. And it is going to, remember, one of the concerns the state has is keeping people in their homes, which is why they have put sphere limits on the ability to collect and sphere limits on the ability to foreclose. And if you look at the tenant protections that they have put into the state of Colorado, where you can't just evict a tenant without cause, you actually have to, there are only certain areas in which you can evict a tenant. And mostly it's after giving them 90 days notice to find another place. You must offer them 90 days notice at the end of a lease, even if you don't want to, even if you want to occupy the house and your lease is coming up or you want to sell the house, you have to give 90 days notice to the tenant and they get an automatic 90-day extension on their lease. So it's one of those things that it makes it harder to get people out. It makes it harder to address your financial crises. And getting back to where I was going with this on that little tangent, I'm sorry, I apologize, but it's the point of the fact of the matter is the state's going to come in and they're going to start mandating certain reserve requirements, but you're going to have to put that into your budget and make sure that you're able to collect it, whatever you're doing. And it's becoming very there's going to be a tension in there. So legal issues you have to deal with. I kind of mentioned a couple of them. When you're dealing with large-scale renovations, the association must consider the declaration provisions. Is owner consent required to spend a certain amount of money? Is owner consent required to raise the funds? Do you have an obsolescence provision? Is the property obsolete? Do you have first mortgagee issues? And I'll address the property being obsolete in the next slide. But you also need to get into what can you do and how can you do it? What's the best way to do it? As I mentioned, the repipe project. Is it better to just close your building and say, look, owners, y'all need to get out of the units. Y'all need to get out and we're going to spend 3 months replacing every pipe in it. And if you don't have any pipe, if we're going to replace every pipe and you come back in 3 months, but go find yourself a place to live for the next 3 months. Can you do that? Yeah. Is it popular? No. Is it something that, again, I have an association that went through this exact issue and they spent 3.5 years doing it, but they kept the owners in place. But the association was in an owner's unit every day, replacing, tearing out walls, putting the unit back together at the end of the day. So it definitely slowed the project down. Which way is the best way to go? I represent a community that's going to undergo a major renovation of the exterior of the building to the point where it's going to be really difficult to live on the inside of the unit. And they're going through these exact same considerations. Are we able to just kick people out of the unit? Can we just close the building to get this done? Well, maybe. You've got to check your declaration. You've got to check your owner approval requirements. Again, they're paying for it. Remember, even if the owners don't get to use the buildings, they can't stop paying assessments. Assessments are still due. The association still has an ongoing obligation. It was a major question that came up during the Marshall fires is, you had associations just wiped out completely and the owners couldn't be there. And the question was, do they have to pay assessments? And the answer is yes. The association still has ongoing business. Even if it doesn't have any houses, it still has to provide insurance. It still has D&O insurance. It still has an ARC that it's approving all the plans to rebuild. It still has to come in and rebuild some of the roads. It still has to come in and do certain things. So yes, the association had outstanding obligations. Now, my recommendation there was, since you don't have certain requirements or certain obligations such as enforcement or landscaping or this, that, or the other, you should revisit your budget and reduce it to the bare minimum. But at the same time, you still do have to address it. And somebody commented, do you happen to have any insight on who's on those upcoming expected reserve requirements might be and when the due date is? Please. Not really. And this one I will address now because we're on topic. Not really. It is just something that was referenced in the task force report. And Representative Titone introduced a bill that passed and was actually a really good bill, but it put a pretty stiff or pretty steep get funded requirement. And if the governor just felt that at this time it would have been too financially burdensome on the owners. But again, this is something that you got a bunch of associations that are hitting those tipping points, and they're hitting those tipping points and needing to be replaced. So what do you do with it? And we'll have to deal with it. So it's going to be, bottom line, Shannon, it'll be next legislative session, and we'll just keep our eye out on it. So if it's next legislative session, expect kind of 3 to 4 more years plus that. So it's at least 5 years away to some funding levels. Maybe the state will require a reserve study in the next year. And it says, if a resident is displaced, what is the liability or obligation of the association for that alternative housing? The question is absolutely none. You could, if you wanted, give an allowance, but remember, and this is kind of one of those things, is that the association's only place the association gets its money is from the owners. So essentially what you're doing is you're acting as a conduit of, look, owner, I'm going to pay me $300, I'll give you $290 back as a housing allowance. It's just silly. So no, you've got no obligation. You just tell them to go and get out and find their own housing, and we'll get the units back together as soon as humanly possible. That's one way of doing it. Now, again, is it politically correct? No. You're going to get a lot of pushback. Is it legally permissible? Yeah, sure is. Okay. So when dealing with large-scale renovations, the association, declaration provisions, what's going on, your obsolescence provision. Again, when you're talking, and that repipe project I mentioned was, $30+ million. The question had to be asked: is this building obsolete? And if this building is obsolete, what do we do with it? And nobody likes to hear that, because what you're essentially saying is the cost to repair your building and your amenities exceeds or comes close to exceeding the value of your unit. So you're telling people that just to make these, what I refer to as non-sexy repairs, because when you walk into a unit, you expect to have working electrical, you expect to have working plumbing, you expect to have working this, that, or the other, and you expect to have a roof over your head. These are they're not the fun updates that you do to a unit to increase its property value. These just have to be done. And then you get into what's in the declaration. Do certain amenities, are they required to be maintained? And remember, 2 years ago, again, because of the COVID pandemic, when associations just decided, you know what, we're just going to close down the pool and not open it because we cannot afford to do that, a lot of owners complained. Where's my pool? I can't go to the office. I can't do this. My kids are driving me crazy. I want to put them at the pool to babysit. Can you just open the damn pool? And the answer was, well, no, we didn't. So we now have a wonderful piece of legislation that says the association has an affirmative duty to protect an owner's right to use the common elements, specifically pools. And specifically, you've got a duty to maintain a roof. You can't kick these repairs down the road. So when you want to just close your pool as a cost-saving mechanism, that's no longer allowed. And if anything is going to be closed for more than 72 hours, you are required to put a notice of the name and phone number of a person upon which somebody can call to talk about the closure. And during that, If you have a pool and a hot tub and your pool needs repairs and you close the pool pending the repair, you have to keep the hot tub open. You can't just close them both. The statute specifically states that to the extent you can keep an amenity open, you must keep it open even during repairs. So that kind of gets to my, can you just close a building? Well, I'm still of the opinion you can close a building because it wouldn't be safe if you're doing some of these renovations to leave it open. But if you can find a way to keep the building open or to keep the common elements open during the repairs, you must do so. And in dealing with that, what I would recommend is, again, take a vote of the owners. Dear owners, our pool requires $600,000 worth of work this year. Here's a special assessment. Do you want to do it? And that way, at least you have the support of, we put it out to the owners and the owners failed to fund the requirement to address the pool issue, so therefore we're off the hook. Not great, but it's the best you got. Okay. Obsolete. What does this mean? Many declarations contain a provision requiring owner approval prior to major renovation project, declaring it obsolete, or quite frankly, if you take a vote to declare the building obsolete because you don't want to make the repairs. And you essentially give the board the authority to market your entire community, including every unit therein, to a single buyer or group of buyers to avoid making the repairs. But you are essentially, again, saying that these units are uninhabitable as they are currently constructed. They are not worth fixing, and we're going to sell our dirt. And the fact that the units are on that dirt is actually a detriment. That is what an obsolescent vote means. So obviously, it's a very high threshold. Iowa requires 80% approval to terminate an obsolete community. Many declarations will contain provisions requiring owner approval for major renovation projects before you go spend a certain amount of money. There are two types of obsolescence, legally speaking. There's functional obsolescence, which involves an existence of a condition on the property that makes the property less desirable in relation to other properties in the area, and which condition is not easily changed. Again, you have old rotted siding, and you have aluminum wiring, and you have old iron galvanized pipes that are leaking every day. These are implements of functional obsolescence that has to be repaired. Or economic or external obsolescence, meaning the lost value of the property resulting from influences external to the property itself. Zoning changes. If you live in a community that is, was at the time a great community because it was, kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and it did this, and now development has come to us, and our community is no longer how the area developed because of whatever reason. You can kind of look at some of the properties on major thoroughfares that at the time they were great communities, but now 60 years later, because of changes of external, you've got a warehouse district, you've got a distribution center for Amazon, and you've got this, that, and the other, that a residential use is no longer desirable. Those are those the economic and external obsolescence provisions. That is just nobody wants to live here as a residence anymore because. So how do you deal with this? Now that we know, how do you pay for it? Well, start with the reserve studies. And if you don't have a reserve study, I, again, highly recommend you go get one. My daughter lived in a condominium association where their reserve study policy flat out says, we're not going to get one. We don't want one. We don't want to know, and we'll deal with it when it comes up. That was their policy. And I told her so. You can't bury your head in the sand. That's when large scale special assessments arise. You also, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. You have to have a reserve study. You have to know what's coming down the pike. Even if you don't fund it all the way, you have to know. Special assessments. What is the assessment capability of the association? And I represent a community that because of deferred maintenance and because of the repairs, that they're special assessing about $1 million a year above and beyond. That's just to address the deferred maintenance, because their common expense assessments are just keeping up with the upkeep of the building, or the operation of the building, but it's not addressing we need a new roof, we need new stairs, we need new elevators, we need new this, that, or the other. And they are special assessing out the wazoo, um, its owners, just to keep the community, to bring the community back to a condition that it deserves. And these units do not suffer from functional obsolescence or economic obsolescence. These are great units in a great location. They're just old. And they've been kicking the can down the road for a long number of years, and it's coming to bite them. But the property values continue to increase, so each special assessment, an owner will just sell and decide, if they decide not to pay it, and the new owner will come in and they'll pay it at closing, and the old owner leaves, they're making a lot of money, and the new owner leaves, and they're happy that they have a unit in the community. It's a little nuts. Loans. Can you borrow? And it's a great idea. Do you have existing funds? And quite frankly, honestly, it'll probably be a mixture of all three on addressing some of these things, because you're going to want owners to have some input into it now, because when you're talking about making these major repairs, what you're really doing, remember, is owners are merely paying for their use of the property. It's they're paying for the depreciation while they're there. So when you get a situation where you get some, and again, this is not uncommon, where you get a bunch of long-term owners saying, I've been here 20 years. I'm not going to be here to enjoy any of these repairs, or this new pool, or this repaired roof or new siding. So I don't want to pay for it. Well, what they're failing to recognize is then they live there free because they didn't pay for their own depreciation. They did not pay for the maintenance of the community as they were living there. So it's a paradigm shift. They need to change their mindset. Okay, special assessments. What do your documents say? Some special assessments are very hard to get through, meaning 67% approval of all owners to do a special assessment. It's when do you ever get 67%? The good, in my opinion, is just following the Kiowa budget approval process, making sure that you present a budget and say, dear owners, here's the special assessment budget, and please approve it. And unless it's rejected by a majority of all owners, it's deemed approved. The bad is kind of those old documents say the association may impose a special assessment on its owner. Nobody wants to be imposed upon. Nobody wants to be told you must do this. And when I say, what does Kiowa say? You could also go into, what does Kiowa say? Kiowa actually says nothing. The word special assessment only appears in Kiowa twice, and neither in the how do you adopt a budget. It really is just disclosure of, you must disclose how much the special assessment is for each individual unit. So it's really silent on the topic of special assessments. What it does is it just addresses budgets. And that's why we have taken a firm position that when you have a special assessment, you should at least be following the Kiowa budget process. So moving forward, okay, the advantages to a special assessment. The association assesses the amounts. It's due 30 days thereafter, and hopefully the owners pay. You can make the repairs right away, and you don't have to worry about this. You don't get a reputation of being a highly assessed building, or you're what I get some owners referring to as, well, our dues, and there's the assessments, and our dues have to stay straight. To me, they're all assessments. What you assess, it's just all an assessment, because you are assessing it to the owners. It's a special assessment and regular assessment. And some associations don't want the stigma of raising their annual dues or annual assessments, because then they feel they're not competitive with other communities, but they'd rather special assess. There's no magic. It takes so much to run the building, and the money has to come from someplace. But again, a special assessment, it's one time, hopefully. If the association is able to fund the special assessment, the repairs can be done quickly, and you don't have to deal with it again, and you're off and at the races. The disadvantages, of course, is the size of the special assessment may cause some hardship, and owners some financial hardship. I don't know how many you manage communities that you could go to the owners and say, give me $3,000 in 30 days. Give me $5,000 in 30 days. Give me $20,000 in 30 days. Um, may result in certain levels of default. And as you know, you have to offer 18-month payment plans right now. So if you have to offer an 18-month payment plan, you're not going to get the money anytime soon anyway. And you may not be able to get owner approval. More on special assessments. You're required to offer the payment plan, as I mentioned, so you've got to, you may have to phase the repairs anyway. Where to start? What is most priority? And getting back to that very first topic of when you look at your community and you look at the disaster preparedness, what's first? What's going to go first? What do you have to address? Prioritize it and make sure you're coming down to your highly needed repairs versus your moderately needed repairs versus apparently hail repairs, which, again, are nominal. What happens to the unit cells during the payment plan? I'm working with an association right now that they adopted a special assessment all at once, but said, hey, we're going to pay it over 7 years. They have an owner coming in and buying and say, I don't want to pay the whole 7 years. I want to pay just this year. And if you pay just this year, that leaves the new owner on the hook for the remaining 6, even though it was all, the special assessment itself was adopted as of a day certain. It just said, look, we're going to break it into 7-year annual payments, which don't. A special assessment by nature is due right there. If you want to do it over 7 years, adopt 7 special assessments. But when you adopt a special assessment, it's due and payable. And there are super lien issues with that, which causes, again, if an owner defaults and the association comes back and says, okay, well, we adopted the special assessment and it was for $5,000 per year for the next 7 years. Well, the bank's only going to come in and say, well, all I owe you was 1, and the rest is gone. Because it was all adopted at once and it was wiped out by the first mortgagee's foreclosure. So you got to be really, really careful when you do that type of stuff. Okay. Loans. Are you even bankable? Common element repairs and upgrades, it can be bank financed. The purchase of the real estate is to be held by the purchase of real estate can be held by the association if you're buying real estate. Purchase of land leases, we've done that with a couple communities. You can finance equipment purchases. But are you bankable? And it's appropriate to fund the entire cost of a capital improvement project. Financing can also cover soft costs such as startup and engineering costs. How does the loan affect unit owners? It doesn't, because it's an association loan that's serviced by common expense assessments. It's not a loan to an individual owner. And again, when you enter into a loan agreement with the bank, they may sit there and say, well, we want you to fund it with a special assessment. That's a big mistake. That's not the way to do it. Because again, if you fund it with a special assessment, that special assessment in the event of a foreclosure gets wiped out 6 months later and you lose all that money. It should just be a line item on your annual budget. And then Diane, the real estate contract would address who pays for the special assessment. That's true. You just have to agree on what the amount of that special assessment is. And when you've done it over a number of years, it's problematic. Okay. How does a loan affect the unit owners? Again, the unit owner is not directly obligated for the association loan. Units can be bought and sold regardless of whether there's a loan in place. The loan does not become reported on personal credit reports, so there's no point in paying it off early. Now, I do know a lot of owners say, I'd rather not pay assessments. I want to pay my portion off early. Well, that's great. Thank you very much. But I cannot guarantee you're done paying for this loan because it's paid out of common expense assessments. And while we can zero out the line item on the budget on your assessment statement, in the event somebody is foreclosed out and we lose portions of the common expense assessments, you ultimately will be required to make up that difference. And now it's nominal. Okay, advantages of a loan. Allows for large dollar items to be completed at once, allows for proper phasing of a project because you've got the money in the bank. You don't need to worry about collection issues because you get the money all at once. You need to worry about the collection issues on the monthly basis, but not for these big special assessment dollars. Disadvantages of a loan. The loan repayment schedule goes over 10 to 15 years. A lot of times you get new owners wondering, why are we still obligated to pay this loan? It was like 10 years ago. What did the money even go for anyway? It's kind of short memory syndrome. It's an ongoing obligation to the association that may need to be serviced over a long period of time, and institutional knowledge of the association's loan. What did you do? Why did we even pay it? Why are we still paying it? All those questions have been asked and they continue to be asked. Collateral. It's not securitized by any real property. It's securitized by the right to pledge income, meaning the association's income stream. Meaning that to approve a loan in a Kiowa-based community, it requires you can only pledge your common expense assessments to the maximum extent permitted in the declaration, which means the declaration has to allow for it. If your declaration just says or is silent on borrowing, you can't borrow without an amendment to the declaration. The Nonprofit Act gives pre-Kiowa communities the right to pledge the right to receive future income without an owner vote. Okay, typical qualification requirements, and I'll start speeding up because I do want to get to that very first question asked. The minimum number of units for property should be at least 20. Absentee owners should not exceed 40%. These are just underwriting guidelines that the banks like to see. Ownership concentrations in their summation should not exceed 30% of all units owned. So one owner should not exceed more than 30% of the units. No unit owner should have control over 50% of the units. Proposed budget increase to service the loan should not exceed 50%. In the event it does, the bank may require increased precautions put in place. Political questions, again, you got to encourage participation, encourage ideas, collection challenges, impact on the community and the neighbors, because again, you got vocal neighbors. You're going to want to make sure that, again, you're committing your assessments to be at a certain level for an extended period of time. All right, the very first, and thank you very much. If you have any other questions, John, here's the answer to your question. How to legally deal with violent squatters, call the police. Homeless who occupy an unoccupied home, call the police, call the owner. You are not the police as an association for a squatter. You do not have control over who does or does not live in a unit. If you see somebody living in a unit and you know there's a squatter, you may want to call the owner and say, hey, owner, you got somebody living in your unit. You may want to get them out, because if you don't, you may find it difficult to get them out in the future. But you as an association have no affirmative duty, and quite frankly, no affirmative option to deal with them. They're not yours. Now, if they're squatting on the common elements, absolutely you do. Call the police, have them removed. If you need to serve them with some sort of order to keep out of your common areas, you can absolutely do that. You can call the police to have them moved on from private property. The Supreme Court ruling that came down that allowed for these homeless encampments related solely to public property. There is no right to squat on private property. You can still call the police and have them removed from your community. You can push them along. Now, I talked to another thing that my usual snarky response is, have you tried paint guns? But that is not a serious recommendation. Do not go around shooting unhoused people on your property with paintballs. It'll just get you into more trouble. But you kind of get the impression, again, just call the police. That's your best and only option. And as far as squatters in the units, you got nothing. All right, Chris, what if you have issues getting people to attend meetings and need approval loan? Ooh, that is a great question. If you tried multiple times, can you push the approval through the courts? Yes, you can, but not using Kiowa. You actually use the Nonprofit Act. There's a provision in the Nonprofit Act that states if, because of a legal impediment or impracticality, you can't get something done because you can't get quorum, you can't get this, you can't get that, and you have to have it. You can have a court approve it for you. And I would recommend if you manage a community that has an assessment cap that says you cannot go above can't go above the assessment cap without a vote of 67% of the owners or 50% of the owners or whatever it is, and you've tried multiple times and you are unable to meet your financial obligations, yes, there's absolutely a court procedure that we can do to get it pushed through the courts. Send me an email, I'll explain it to you in more depth, but it's through the Nonprofit Act. And the Nonprofit Act gives the district court the ability to approve either lower quorum requirements or absolutely just approve the what you're asking for. It's a phenomenal tool that I think if you have not had a quorum at your annual meeting in a number of years, I think at this point you are required to go through this process to have the court reduce your quorum so you can have an annual election. I've seen courts on their own do it because when you start to try and do certain things, the courts are looking and saying, how do you have a board if you haven't had a quorum in 15 years? something you should absolutely do and absolutely look at. And if you want, we can put together a class on it. And with that being said, your hour with me is up. I want to thank everybody for staying with me the entire hour. It has been great fun, and I will see you next week or next month on the legislative update when I get to tell you everything the legislature did to you this year. Have fun. We'll talk to you soon. Bye now.